The slam of a door echoed like a gunshot. "Are you teaching my daughters? What the hell is this?" Richard Callahan's voice ripped through the hallway, shaking the quiet like glass shattering on stone. Inside the softly lit bedroom, time stood still. 6-year-old twins Lily and Grace froze on the bed, their matching pink dresses trembling as they clutched their notebooks to their chests, their wide hazel eyes locked on the blackboard where white chalk scrawls still glowed under the lamp. And there, standing tall, her dark skin radiant against the light, her hand still holding the chalk, was Maya Johnson. She had just finished telling the girls that words could carry memories across the water like little boats when their father appeared. Richard filled the doorway like a storm about to break. His hands pressed against his head, his mouth hung open in fury, his sharp gray-blue eyes blazing. "This is my house," he thundered, his voice cracking like lightning. "Not a classroom. Not a crusade. Who gave you the right to teach my children?" The chalk slipped from Maya's fingers. The twins gasped. The room quivered on the edge of collapse. And in that fragile silence, you could feel it, the moment that would change everything. The sky above Nashville that late autumn afternoon carried the muted heaviness of pewter, a thin sheet of gray light filtering through low-hung clouds that pressed on the horizon. A crisp wind carried the dry rustle of fallen leaves and the faint scent of pine drifting from the nearby hills. The Callahan estate, seated on a stretch of land at the edge of the city, loomed like a citadel of limestone and glass, a house that had been built to impress investors as much as to shelter a family. Its windows caught the dull glow of the October day, and the copper gutters gleamed with the sharp memory of a rainstorm that had passed the night before. Richard Callahan, millionaire real estate developer, stepped from the black town car that rolled to a quiet stop before the front steps. He was in his early 40s, tall with the lean musculature of a man who never allowed indulgence to dictate his body. His hair, thick and dark, carried the faintest threads of silver at the temples, a reminder that grief, not just time, leaves its marks. His face bore the handsome symmetry of someone groomed for magazine profiles, yet softened by lines at the corners of his eyes, carved more by sleepless nights and boardroom stress than by laughter. His jaw was square and tense, the jaw of a man who believed resolve could be carved into bone. In Nashville's society columns, he was known as a power broker, who could turn derelict streets into shining avenues, who could bend zoning boards with a phone call. But inside the walls of his home, his identity was stripped of applause. Here he was, simply a father who, since the tragic death of his wife Eliza 3 years earlier, had found himself both architect and warden of his children's lives. Eliza had been the warmth of the house, slender, auburn-haired, with a voice that could coax stories from silence. One summer evening, she had driven out for groceries and never returned, struck down by a drunk driver on a winding Tennessee road. Richard had not wept at the funeral. He had stood like marble while the preacher spoke, convinced that strength meant refusing collapse. Since then, he had structured his grief the way he structured his investments, tightly controlled, wrapped in schedules and tasks, denying chaos entry. For his twin daughters, Lily and Grace, he had provided everything: measurable security, tutors, toys, a chef who hid vegetables and pasta so efficiently the girls barely noticed, but he had starved the intangible: softness, memory, and the permission to grieve openly. Today, Richard returned earlier than expected from a business trip to New York. The negotiations had concluded swiftly, his private jet slicing through the gray clouds with the neat precision of a blade. He had not informed the household staff of his early return. Surprises, he told himself, were necessary to measure diligence. Yet under the practiced logic was another truth. He yearned for some fragment of spontaneity in a life that had calcified into routines. The foyer greeted him with its high ceilings and polished marble floors, the chandelier scattering small constellations of light across the walls. Yet amid the scents of lemon polish and beeswax lingered something out of place, the faint mineral tang of chalk. He froze, unsettled by the ghost of classrooms past. His late wife had loved writing notes in chalk on the kitchen board: reminders, invitations, whimsical thoughts. The smell drew a jagged memory across his chest. Following the sound of faint tapping, he moved through the hallway until he reached the sunroom. The door stood slightly ajar, and he heard a voice, a woman's voice, gentle, measured, warm, wrapping around words like a shawl around a child. "Words are little boats," the voice said. "They carry feelings that cross the water when arms are too tired to hold them." Richard pushed open the door. The sunroom, designed years ago at Eliza's insistence as a place for messy learning, had been transformed into something resembling a classroom. A vintage slate board leaned against an easel, chalk words glowing faintly white against black. Memory, meaning, map. Strands of twine stretched across the wall, clipped with index cards. A jar of pencils stood sentinel on the windowsill, and before the board stood Maya Johnson, the woman Richard had hired as a maid, though she had quietly become more than that to his daughters. Maya was 32, a black woman with warm brown skin, luminous dark eyes, and hair coiled neatly into a bun, rebellious strands springing loose near her temples. She was not tall, but her presence filled the room with unassuming authority. She wore a simple dove-gray dress, soft house shoes, and in her hands she held a stick of chalk, like it was both a tool and a gift. Maya's life before the Callahan estate had been a patchwork of sacrifice. She had once dreamed of teaching, but college fell from her grasp when her scholarship vanished and her mother's illness demanded every hour she had. Work became survival. Yet her love for words and for guiding children never dimmed. She carried those instincts wherever she went, whether in bedtime stories, whispered car rides, or stolen minutes of lesson-making in households like this one. At the low table sat Lily and Grace Callahan, 6 years old, identical in face, but not in detail. Lily bore a scatter of freckles across her nose and a stubborn cowlick that refused taming. Grace had a dimple that flashed whenever she solved puzzles and a faint scar above her eyebrow from a tumble during a cape and coffee table adventure. Both had hazel eyes flecked with green and gold, the inheritance of their mother, and wore denim pinafores over striped shirts. Their ponytails bounced as they scribbled notes, eyes wide with fascination. Lily's page was covered in blocky letters. Grace had already drawn a small boat with a flag. Their faces radiated eagerness, the kind of joy Richard had not seen on them in years. Maya's voice held them spellbound. "Sometimes," she continued, sketching a stick figure beside a drawn boat, "memories are too heavy to carry in your arms. But if you put them in a poem or letter, they float. You can let them sail, and they won't sink you." Grace whispered, "Like when we wrote to Pepper." Pepper had been the family's brindle mutt, patient and loyal, who had died the previous summer. Maya had helped the twins write farewell letters, folded them into little paper boats, and set them afloat in the creek beyond the property. "Exactly," Maya smiled, her eyes softening. "You gave your love a boat, and it floated." Richard's grip on the doorframe tightened. The sight of his daughters glowing with enthusiasm, entranced by lessons he had not sanctioned, triggered something fierce inside him. This was his house, his children, his rules. Warmth was being transacted without his oversight. He stepped inside. His presence broke the spell like a dropped book in a library. The twins turned, faces alight. "Daddy," they chimed, voices in perfect harmony, eyes shining with joy at his sudden appearance. Maya stiffened slightly, straightening her posture, chalk pinched between her fingers to avoid smudging. "Mr. Callahan," she said, voice polite, steady. "Welcome home." Richard scanned the room, his daughter's notebooks, the chalkboard words, the atmosphere of joy that did not require him. He felt his control slipping. "What is this?" His voice carried an edge of iron, the authority of boardrooms. "A classroom?" Maya kept her tone calm. "We were working on expressing memories, sir." The girls. "I don't pay you to play school," Richard cut in sharply, his jaw tightening. "This is my home, not some seminar." The twins looked at Maya, seeking reassurance. Lily whispered, "But Daddy, Miss Maya says words are boats." Grace added timidly, "So we don't have to be scared of the ocean of feelings." Richard's expression hardened. "No one is drowning," he replied too quickly, his voice almost brittle. "If there are lessons to be taught, I will hire professionals." "That's not your role, Maya." Maya lowered her eyes briefly, then set down the chalk. Her voice remained gentle. "I wasn't trying to overstep." The girls asked, and I thought. Richard raised a hand, slicing the air. "Enough." Lesson over. The twins shrank back, their joy extinguished. Obediently, they slid from their chairs, stacked their notebooks, and shuffled toward the hallway. Lily lingered a moment, brushing her hand against the word memory on the board as if testing if it was still warm. Then both girls ran off toward the kitchen, their voices fading down the corridor. The sunroom dimmed in their absence. Maya folded her hands, steadying herself. "Children don't drown because they have feelings, Mr. Callahan," she said softly before leaving the room. "They drown when no one teaches them how to float." Her footsteps receded down the hall. Richard stood alone before the blackboard. Memory, meaning, map. The words glared back at him like accusations. He told himself he had done the right thing, maintained order. Yet something gnawed beneath the armor, a whisper of Eliza's laughter, the memory of her chalkboard invitations. "Meet me by the willow," words that had once kept his family afloat. He shut the door quietly, his reflection in the hallway mirror staring back, a man who mistook control for care, who had closed a door on warmth. Outside, the October wind nudged the chimes, and the sky dimmed toward evening. Frost clung to the grass when dawn stretched across Nashville. The Callahan estate sat like a fortress in the pale light, its windows reflecting the bleached morning sky. Inside, the hush of the house was heavier than usual. Even the old grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to tick more cautiously, as if reluctant to disturb the silence left behind after last night's disruption in the sunroom. Richard Callahan had risen before anyone else, a habit forged from grief as much as ambition. He stood in front of the mirror in his dressing room, fastening a steel blue tie over a crisp white shirt. The reflection that looked back at him was one he knew well. A tall, lean man in his early 40s with dark hair brushed neatly, jawline squared as if carved by willpower. His eyes, gray and cool, carried both exhaustion and command. They were eyes trained to scan contracts, weigh risks, and dismiss what could not be proven. Yet this morning they avoided their own gaze, preferring the safe terrain of the tie knot he perfected every day. He walked to his office, a room lined with glass shelves and black and white photographs of developments he had built. He opened his laptop and typed with deliberate precision, a directive to the household manager. "Effective immediately," he wrote. "Miss Johnson is not to conduct instructional activities with the children. Reading stories at bedtime permitted if requested, but no blackboard use, no lessons, no writing exercises. Certified instructors will be retained for all academic needs." He signed it curtly, R. Callahan. With a sharp exhale, he pressed send. The email arrived on the phone of Beatrice Lang, the estate's household manager. Beatrice was 58, small and wiry, her back still as straight as when she had studied ballet decades ago. Her bobbed chestnut hair was peppered with silver strands she wore with pride, and her hazel eyes behind neat tortoiseshell glasses carried a quiet authority that could organize chaos without ever raising her voice. Beatrice had spent most of her career running luxury hotels. She knew how to keep a household humming, and she knew when to keep her opinions folded neatly away. Still, when she read Richard's order, she sighed. She had seen what Maya's gentle teaching did for the twins, but orders were orders. She printed the message and slipped it into her leather folio. The kitchen filled with the aroma of toast and warm butter, courtesy of Chef Donovan Pierce, the estate's cook. Donovan was 45, broad-shouldered with sandy hair thinning at the temples and a soft beard dusted with flour. His frame suggested he had once been an athlete, though years of tasting his own recipes had rounded his edges. He wore a faded red bandana tied around his neck, a habit from his years cooking in diners before rising to private kitchens. Donovan was a man whose patience was measured in simmering soups and slow roasts. He hummed quietly as he prepared breakfast, but the tune faltered when the twins entered the kitchen. Lily and Grace, 6-year-old mirrors of one another, shuffled in with none of their usual sparkle. Lily's freckles seemed dimmer, and Grace's dimple failed to appear. They wore matching corduroy dresses under wool cardigans, their ponytails tied neatly, but without the bounce of excitement. They climbed onto the stools at the island, small hands folded on the counter, waiting for Donovan's offering like little soldiers awaiting orders. "Morning, ladies," Donovan said, his voice deliberately cheerful. He placed 2 soft-boiled eggs in cups before them, with toast cut into tidy soldiers. Normally, he would stage an edible parade pancakes shaped like bears or fruit arranged into faces. Today, he sensed such whimsy might collapse under the weight in the room. "Morning," Grace replied softly. Lily nodded but said nothing. They picked up their spoons obediently. No giggles, no playful chatter. Maya Johnson entered quietly, her gray dress pressed, her dark curls pulled back into a bun with a few stubborn strands rebelling. At 32, Maya carried herself with a dignity that required no announcement. Her warm brown skin glowed faintly in the kitchen's morning light, but her eyes were shadowed, remembering last night's reprimand. She smiled at the girls, who instantly sat up straighter. She reached out and let her fingers rest gently on their heads, a touch brief but grounding, before stepping back. Beatrice appeared in the doorway, her folio clutched against her chest. "Maya," she said softly, nodding toward the pantry. Maya followed, already knowing what waited. In the small pantry, shelves stacked with jars of preserves and orderly rows of tins, Beatrice handed Maya the printed directive. Maya read it slowly, every word pressing a new weight onto her shoulders. She folded the page with care, tucking it into her apron pocket. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "Understood." Beatrice's hazel eyes softened. "I wish I could change it," she murmured, "but I'll do what I can to make this easier." Maya nodded, grateful for the kindness even when it could not alter the command. She returned to the kitchen, moving with quiet precision. She sliced apples into thin crescents and arranged them around the twins' plates like a wreath, wordless gestures replacing the lessons she had been forbidden to teach. Lily glanced up. "Miss Maya," she whispered, "no boats today?" Maya's heart ached, but she forced a gentle smile. "Boats will wait for better tides, Star," she said, using her grandmother's phrase. "Today we train our soldiers to be brave." She pointed to the toast sticks and winked. The twins smiled faintly and obeyed, dipping the toast into their eggs. Richard entered then, tall and composed, his tie perfectly knotted, his expression unreadable. "Morning," he said. "Morning, Daddy," the girls chorused, their voices thinner than usual. He smoothed Lily's cowlick and adjusted Grace's ribbon, small gestures rehearsed to look fatherly. He poured himself coffee and took a seat, his eyes flicking briefly to Maya. Outside, through the kitchen window, a figure walked along the path that bordered the property. Caroline Miller, the neighbor, carried a thermos of coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. Caroline was 37, petite, with a sharp grace, her dark wavy hair pinned carelessly with a pencil. Her brown eyes were warm but perceptive, the kind that had built her career as an investigative journalist. She had been Eliza's closest friend, and her presence near the estate was both comfort and sting. Today, she wore a navy peacoat and scuffed boots, her expression thoughtful as she glanced at the house. She tapped on the back door lightly. Beatrice let her in with a nod. "Morning," Caroline greeted, directing her smile at Lily and Grace. "I heard there were moons for breakfast." "Am I too late?" Lily brightened slightly. "They're apples today." "You can have one." Caroline accepted a slice with mock solemnity. "The best moons I've ever tasted." She crouched to the girl's level, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial tone. Tell me, are you two my favorite kind of trouble this morning? Grace shook her head. We're not trouble. We're educational. Caroline laughed softly. That's the best kind of trouble. Richard cleared his throat, his eyes cool as he regarded Caroline. We're keeping breakfast simple today, he said, his voice even but edged with dismissal. Caroline straightened, unfazed. Of course. Just passing by. The willow tree looks beautiful this morning. Eliza always said it loved autumn best. Her words lingered in the air, a memory pressed into the present. Richard's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Caroline gave the twins each a kiss on the head, exchanged a knowing nod with Maya, and left quietly, her boots clicking softly on the porch. The rest of the day carried the new order. The blackboard in the sunroom stood untouched, its surface wiped clean, the words erased as though they had never existed. The twins attended their scheduled tutoring with a certified teacher, a brisk woman with a clipboard and tidy hair who spoke in terms of progress charts and milestones. Lily and Grace obeyed but without sparkle, their voices subdued, their drawings flat. In the late afternoon, Maya folded laundry in the quiet of the utility room, her hands moving automatically. On the counter beside her, she placed 2 paper cranes folded from scraps of colored paper, a small act of defiance and love. She would not teach, but she could still leave symbols for the girls to find. That evening, dinner was roast chicken with rosemary, the air filled with the comfort of herbs. The twins ate politely, answering their father's questions about arithmetic with short responses. When Lily mentioned boats, Richard immediately shifted the topic to spelling. Maya kept her gaze lowered, though her heart clenched. After dinner, the twins went upstairs to choose pajamas. Maya lingered by their doorway, tucking them in with stories carefully chosen to avoid lessons. She kissed their foreheads and whispered, "You are safe. You are loved." Downstairs, Richard passed the sunroom. He paused, hand on the doorknob, staring at the blank blackboard. For a moment he considered moving it into storage. Instead, he closed the door gently and walked away. To him, the silence felt like order. To the rest of the house, it was simply cold. The third morning after Richard's edict, the Callahan house moved like a theater stripped of music. The twins walked to their lessons without skipping, sat through arithmetic without questions, and ate their meals as though politeness had been rehearsed and joy retired. Even Marble the tabby cat, usually draped on the sunroom windowsill with the self-assurance of royalty, seemed restless, flicking his tail at invisible irritants. The blackboard in the corner stood blank and accusing, a sentinel erased of purpose. Lily and Grace, 6-year-old mirrors but with hearts beating in different rhythms, had spent the nights whispering in their shared bedroom. Lily, freckles dusting her nose, braver in confession, would say, "I miss when words were boats." Grace, her dimple appearing only when she felt safe, whispered back, "Maybe if we write our own boats, no one can stop us." Together, they hatched a secret plan to bring Maya back into their world of letters and memory. One late afternoon, when the air carried the scent of damp leaves and the faint smoke of neighbors' fireplaces, the girls slipped out into the garden. They wore corduroy jackets, too big but comfortable, and clutched a small spiral notebook stolen from the back of a drawer. The garden had been Eliza's sanctuary, neat beds of herbs, a willow tree whose branches whispered against the ground, and a stone bench carved with vines. To the twins, it was holy ground, the place where they felt closest to their mother. Maya was there, kneeling by the rosemary bushes, tying back branches with quiet concentration. She had not intended to disobey Richard's command. At 32, Maya Johnson had learned the art of survival, knowing when to bend and when to stand, when to speak and when to swallow words. Her hair was tied back, but a few curls had sprung loose, and her gray dress bore faint smudges of garden soil. When she saw the twins creeping toward her with conspiratorial expressions, her heart softened even as her mind whispered caution. "Miss Maya," Grace said, eyes wide, "can you tell us one story?" Just one, not a lesson. Just a story. Maya hesitated, her hands pausing over the twine. Stories can be boats, too, she said softly. But stories have a way of drifting into lessons, even if we don't mean them to. We don't care, Lily insisted, thrusting the notebook into Maya's hands. We want to write letters. For Mama, Maya's chest ached. She sat on the stone bench, the twins pressing close on either side, and opened the notebook. She handed Lily a pencil, Grace another. Then we will write together, she whispered, not as a teacher, as someone who remembers too. As the girls scribbled, Maya guided gently, suggesting words without dictating. Dear Mama, Lily wrote in shaky letters, we miss you when the sun goes to bed. Grace, more precise, wrote, I still keep the ribbon you tied in my hair. I hope you see it. The pages filled with innocent honesty, raw and unguarded. Maya added nothing of her own, but her presence gave the girls courage to speak. Unbeknownst to them, Caroline Miller had walked past the garden path. Caroline, 37, petite with dark hair pinned loosely by a pencil, carried her reporter's notebook under her arm. She had a journalist's eye for the unspoken, the unseen, and her late best friend Eliza's daughters held a special place in her heart. She stopped, unseen, watching the twins huddled against Maya, their pencils scratching furiously, their faces lit with the fragile glow of memory. Caroline's throat tightened. She knew better than anyone how silence could suffocate a child, and seeing the girls given permission to remember made her both ache and rejoice. She lifted her notebook and scribbled a single line. Children carry grief in their pockets until someone hands them paper. She closed the book quickly, unwilling to intrude further. But Richard Callahan was also walking the property that evening. He had returned early from a meeting downtown, still in his dark suit, his tie loosened, but his posture rigid. He had intended to check the perimeter fencing where new stonework was being considered, but the sound of giggles and pencils scratching lured him toward the willow tree. When he saw them, the twins pressed close to Maya, letters spread across their laps. His chest surged with anger. His voice, sharp as a gavel, shattered the garden's quiet. What is this? The girls jumped, their pencils clattering onto the bench. Maya rose quickly, clutching the notebook, her face pale but composed. Mr. Callahan, she began carefully, they only wanted to write to their mother. Not a lesson, just their hearts. You defied me, Richard snapped, stepping closer. His gray eyes flashed like cold steel. I said no teaching, no blackboard, no writing. Do you think I'm blind? Daddy, Lily cried, clutching his sleeve. It's not like school. It's letters from Mama. She misses us, Grace added, her voice trembling. We're not learning. We're remembering. Richard's anger turned, not toward the girls, but toward Maya. You are finished here, he said, his tone final. Pack your things. You will not confuse my children with... But he stopped, silenced not by his own conscience, but by Lily's sudden burst of tears. She pressed her small fist to her eyes and cried, her voice breaking. Do you not remember Mama? Do you not care about her anymore? The words struck like a blade. Richard froze, the anger draining from his face. His chest heaved once, then stilled. He opened his mouth, but nothing came. His carefully built wall of discipline cracked at its foundation. For the first time in years, he felt exposed, not as a father or a millionaire, but as a man accused by his own child of forgetting the love of his life. Maya stood silent, the notebook in her hand trembling. Caroline, hidden at the garden's edge, pressed her lips together, resisting the urge to intervene. This was not her moment. It belonged to them. Richard closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself. When he opened them, his expression was hard again, though less certain. Enough for tonight, he said, his voice low. Inside, both of you. Now, the twins obeyed reluctantly, their letters half finished, their faces streaked with tears. Maya followed, holding the notebook against her chest like a shield. Richard remained under the willow tree, the October wind brushing against his suit, the garden heavy with the sound of absence. The stone bench still held the impressions of small bodies, and on the ground lay a single scrap of paper. He picked it up. It read, in Grace's careful script, "I hope you still see me." His hand trembled before he tucked the page into his pocket. He turned toward the house, his steps heavy, the cold wall around his heart beginning to feel less like protection and more like a prison. The house fell into silence after the confrontation in the garden, the kind of silence that does not soothe but stifles. Dinner that evening had been eaten in mechanical movements. Lily pushed her peas around her plate, Grace gnawed at her bread without appetite, and Richard sat at the head of the table, his fork clinking against porcelain in steady rhythm. Maya moved quietly in the background, serving and clearing dishes, her eyes lowered, her posture rigid, her heart carrying the weight of the girl's unfinished letters. Later, the twins trudged upstairs, their small bodies tired not from play but from the heaviness of tears. Richard remained in his study, staring at the glow of his desk lamp, but the numbers on the reports blurred, refusing to arrange themselves into meaning. His suit jacket hung over the chair, his tie loosened, his hair ruffled in a way that betrayed hands tugging at it in frustration. He poured a drink from the crystal decanter, amber liquid catching the lamplight, but even whiskey tasted like ash on his tongue. When the house settled into the breath of sleep, Richard rose and walked upstairs. He stopped at the doorway of his daughter's shared room. The lamp on the nightstand glowed softly, illuminating the pale faces of the twins. They were curled beneath quilts patterned with blue stars, their lashes still damp. He stepped inside, careful not to creak the floorboards. Grace shifted in her sleep, and a small corner of folded paper slipped from beneath her pillow. Richard bent down, curiosity pulling harder than hesitation. He lifted it carefully, unfolding the page. The words, written in a child's uneven script, pierced him. "Dear Mama, I am scared Daddy will never laugh again." The sentence sat in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. Richard's vision blurred. He blinked furiously, but the tears refused to retreat. For years he had mastered the art of restraint at the funeral, in boardrooms, even in the solitude of his own room. But now the dam cracked. Silent tears rolled down his cheeks, dripping onto the paper, smudging the ink. He pressed the letter to his chest, his broad shoulders shaking with a grief he had locked away for too long. For the first time in years, Richard cried. Not the controlled release of a man who schedules his emotions, but the broken sobs of a father who finally realized that the fortress he had built around himself had become a prison for his children. He sat on the edge of the bed, burying his face in his hands, the sound muffled so as not to wake them. The girls slept on, unaware that their words had broken through the cold wall around their father's heart. Elsewhere in the city, Caroline Miller sat at her desk in the small cottage next door. Her desk was cluttered with stacks of papers, old clippings, and a lamp that glowed over her notes. Caroline was 37, with wavy brown hair pinned loosely by a pencil and tired but determined eyes. Tonight she wore a wool cardigan over her t-shirt, her fingers smudged with ink. She tapped the keys of her old typewriter, the clack of letters filling the room. She was writing a piece not for the city paper's front page, but for its Sunday feature section, a piece she titled in her draft, "The Silence of Fathers." In it she explored the invisible cost of men who believed that strength meant silence, that holding back tears was an act of protection rather than abandonment. Her words came not only from her training as a journalist, but from the ache of watching her best friend's husband retreat into a fortress of stoicism after Eliza's death. She remembered nights when Eliza confided her fears, her laughter masking concern for how Richard buried himself in work. Now Caroline watched those same patterns carve cracks in the twins. She wrote, "Children learn what silence costs by watching the faces of their fathers. When laughter disappears, they believe it is their fault. When tears are hidden, they think sadness is forbidden." Carolyn paused, rubbing her temples. She thought of Lily's freckles and Grace's dimples, of the way they leaned into Maya's warmth. She added another line. "The most dangerous lie is that children are too fragile for truth, when in fact it is silence that shatters them." She leaned back, staring at the page. Her heart ached for Richard too. despite her anger at his choices. She had seen his devotion to the company, his rigid pursuit of control, and she knew it came not from malice, but from fear that if he let go even once, the whole world would collapse. Caroline knew her piece would be published in 2 weeks, long enough for Richard to possibly recognize himself in its reflection. She hoped it would not be too late. Back in the mansion, Richard sat in the dark, Grace's letter still clutched in his hand. He thought of Eliza, her auburn hair catching the sunlight, the way she scrawled notes on the chalkboard in the kitchen. "Don't forget the moon tonight." He thought of her laughter, the way she had been able to coax giggles out of him even during the most serious meetings. He remembered the girl's question in the garden, "Do you not remember Mama?" And he realized the cruel truth. He had remembered, but he had never shared. In his silence, he had let them believe he had forgotten. He leaned down and kissed Grace's forehead, whispering words that felt like confession. "I remember her, my star. I always will." He brushed Lily's hair back, his tears still damp on his cheeks. He whispered, "And I will try, I promise, to laugh again." The night pressed in around him, heavy but not unbearable. He slipped the letter into his pocket, carrying it as a talisman. As he left the room, he glanced at the closed door of the sunroom, where the blackboard leaned erased and silent. He made a vow he did not yet know how to fulfill, to learn how to float with his daughters, not just keep them from sinking. The house settled into deep sleep. Maya, awake in her small room, prayed silently for the girls' hearts to stay whole. Caroline, in her cottage, continued typing the words that might pierce Richard's armor, and Richard, for the first time in years, allowed himself to feel the raw edge of grief, and in doing so, took the first step toward healing. The morning after Richard discovered his daughter's letter, the Callahan mansion felt different. Sunlight spilled across the polished wood floors, warmer than usual, or perhaps Richard's eyes were at last willing to see it. He had barely slept. Instead, he sat at his desk, Grace's note tucked in his breast pocket like a weight and a compass. His face looked haggard in the mirror, gray eyes rimmed with fatigue, but there was a softness there, like cracks in stone that allow green shoots to emerge. At breakfast, Lily and Grace sat quietly, their hair still tangled from restless sleep. Maya, who had been moving around the kitchen with her usual care, paused when Richard entered. She expected distance, perhaps more reprimands. Instead, Richard cleared his throat and spoke in a voice less ironclad than before. "Miss Johnson," he said, and the twins looked up immediately, hope flashing across their faces. "I may have been wrong." The admission alone felt like shifting tectonic plates. "Would you help me build something? A place in this house. A place where the girls can remember their mother." The room stilled. Maya blinked, her dark eyes widening. For a moment she looked almost fragile, as though someone had lifted a burden she had carried so long she forgot it was heavy. "Yes, Mr. Callahan," she whispered, then steadied herself. "Yes, I will." The twins erupted from their stools, hugging Maya around the waist, joy returning like the rush of a long-awaited tide. Lily exclaimed, "A memory place!" And Grace clapped her hands, dimples flashing. Richard allowed himself a faint smile. They chose the sunroom, once a hollow of erased chalkboards. The girls fetched a box of their mother's belongings, an old scarf, a pressed flower, a photograph of Eliza holding them as babies. Maya suggested adding shelves for letters and drawings, a jar for wishes, and a lantern to light in the evenings. Richard listened and, for the first time in years, contributed his own ideas. Eliza's favorite willow carving could be moved indoors. A quilt she had stitched could cover the bench. As the girls worked, Marble the cat strolled in, his gray tabby fur glowing in the sunlight, his yellow eyes narrowing in judgment as he leapt onto the bench. He sniffed the scarf, then curled beside it as though to guard the memory. Lily giggled. "See? Even Marble remembers Mama." But beyond the warmth of the house, storm clouds gathered in Richard's professional world. At midday, his phone buzzed with a call from Harold Whitmore, chairman of the Callahan Development Board. Harold was 60, tall with a thick mane of white hair and a barrel chest. He wore three-piece suits even at home and carried himself like an old general surveying a battlefield. His voice was gravelly, the result of decades of cigars, and his patience was famously thin. "Richard," Harold barked over the line, "we need you in the office. Investors are unsettled. They say you've been distracted. If you want to keep control of this company, you need to show up in person every day." Richard pinched the bridge of his nose. "Harold, I've built this company. 1 week of working from home won't collapse it. You think the board sees it that way? You're young enough to forget loyalty doesn't outlive numbers. If you aren't at the helm, they'll look for someone else." Harold's tone dropped lower, the way a storm cloud swallows light. "There's talk of a vote, Richard. Show them your devotion, or risk losing control." After the call, Richard sat in silence, the phone heavy in his hand. His heart tugged in two directions, toward the boardroom skyscraper downtown and toward the sunroom where his daughters and Maya were arranging scraps of memory into something whole. By afternoon, Caroline Miller appeared at the kitchen door, wearing a navy trench coat and a scarf wrapped loose around her neck. Her brown eyes softened when she saw the changes in the sunroom. She was petite but confident, the kind of woman whose pen could wound or heal depending on the story she told. She smiled faintly at Richard, though her eyes lingered on the jar of pencils and the quilt draped over the bench. "So, you're building a corner for remembering," Caroline said, her voice both gentle and edged with meaning. Eliza would have liked that. She always believed children need a place for their hearts to rest. Richard met her gaze, then looked away. "I'm trying," he admitted. Caroline nodded, her expression softening further. Sometimes trying is the bravest thing. That evening, when the house quieted, Richard stood in the doorway of the sunroom. The girls had fallen asleep with smudges of chalk still on their fingers, and Maya had tidied the space, arranging their drawings into a gallery of crooked love. He placed Grace's letter in the memory jar, sealing it with reverence. His phone buzzed again. An email from Harold, blunt as a hammer, meeting tomorrow. "Attendance mandatory. Absence will be interpreted as forfeiture of commitment." Richard's heart clenched. He walked to the window. Outside, the willow swayed, leaves whispering secrets to the night. Behind him, the sunroom glowed with traces of his wife's spirit, his daughter's laughter, and Maya's steady hands. Ahead of him, the skyscrapers of Nashville demanded his presence, cold and gleaming. The choice loomed, career or family. He clenched his fists at his sides. For years he had chosen ambition, silence, and order. Now the memory of his daughter's words haunted him. "I am scared Daddy will never laugh again." Richard exhaled slowly. He knew the board's ultimatum would test him. But tonight, as he stood at the threshold of the memory corner, the weight of decision pressed harder than any contract he had ever signed. The day of decision began with a sunrise that seemed deliberately brighter, as though the Tennessee sky itself understood the weight pressing on Richard Callahan's heart. Frost still clung to the lawn, but golden light spilled across the Callahan estate, softening the hard lines of limestone and glass. Birds chattered in the sycamores lining the driveway, breaking through the silence that had wrapped the house in recent weeks. Richard stood in his study, staring at the papers spread across his desk. On one side lay contracts, stock valuations, and board projections demanding his full allegiance to Callahan Development. On the other, drawings by Lily and Grace paper boats, stick figures of their mother with her auburn hair, a picture of the family standing under the willow tree. His gray eyes lingered on the children's sketches, and he realized for the first time how little comfort numbers gave him compared to these fragile offerings of love. He had spent years treating the company as if it were his heart, yet it was the quiet words of his daughters that had finally made him feel alive again. The clock chimed softly. Richard inhaled deeply, squared his broad shoulders, and reached for his phone. He called Harold Whitmore, the gruff chairman of the board. Harold, 60 years old, with silver hair and a cigar-roughened voice, answered immediately. "Richard, You better be on your way to the office. The board is restless. I won't be there, Richard said, his tone steady. I'll sell part of my shares. Enough to keep influence, but not control. I will not let the company own me, Harold. My children come first. There was a long silence, broken only by the sound of Harold's exhale. You're making a mistake. The company is your legacy. Richard glanced at Grace's note tucked in his wallet. I am scared Daddy will never laugh again. His jaw tightened. My daughters are my legacy. The company can survive without me at the helm. They cannot. Before Harold could respond, Richard ended the call. The decision had been made. When he entered the kitchen that morning, Maya was already preparing muffins, her blue dress a brighter shade than her usual gray. She looked up cautiously, unsure of his mood. The twins sat at the counter, swinging their legs as they drew in notebooks. Richard cleared his throat. I've made a choice, he said, his voice filling the kitchen. I've sold part of my stake in the company. From now on, I'll be home more. I'll be with you. The girls froze, their pencils slipping from their hands. Then Lily squealed, launching herself into her father's arms. Grace followed, hugging his waist, her dimple appearing as relief washed over her. Maya watched, her hand over her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. That afternoon, Richard gathered the family in the sunroom. Once a place of reprimand and silence, it now hummed with warmth. Together, they began building what Richard called the memory corner. The twins decorated with childlike intensity, pinning their letters and drawings on twine that stretched across the windows. Maya carefully folded Eliza's quilt over the bench, smoothing its stitches with reverence. Richard contributed items he had once hidden away, Eliza's favorite scarf, a willow-engraved carving she had adored, and a photograph of her cradling the twins as infants. Even Marble the cat seemed to understand. He padded into the sunroom, his fur glowing silver in the light, and curled up beside the scarf as though standing guard. The girls laughed, declaring him the official guardian of the memory corner. By evening, the family decided to hold a remembrance in the garden. Richard suggested it should not be grand but intimate, just them and the people who loved Eliza most. They placed lanterns along the stone path, jars of candles beneath the willow tree, and strung ribbons from branch to branch. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of wood smoke drifting from nearby houses, but the garden glowed with gentle light. Caroline Miller arrived just before dusk, wrapped in a burgundy coat, her wavy hair loose around her face. She carried a wicker basket filled with cocoa and biscuits. When she stepped into the garden and saw the memory corner beneath the willow, her brown eyes shimmered. "This," she whispered, "is exactly what Eliza dreamed of." Richard turned sharply. "What do you mean?" Caroline set down the basket, her voice steady. "Eliza told me, during those long afternoons when the girls napped, that she wanted to create a home of memory, not a shrine, not a monument, just a corner where love could keep breathing. She called it her memory home. She wanted the girls to grow up knowing their mother was never truly gone." Richard's throat tightened. He looked around, the lanterns glowing, the quilt, the girls' drawings fluttering in the breeze. Without realizing it, he had built exactly what Eliza had once longed for. His eyes glistened, and he whispered hoarsely, "Then perhaps I have finally heard her." The ceremony began as the sun slipped behind the hills. Lily held her notebook, her small hands trembling but determined. "Dear Mama," she read aloud, "we miss you when the sun goes to bed, but now we made a place so you can stay." Grace followed, her voice careful and precise. "I still wear the ribbon you gave me. I hope you see it." Richard stepped forward last, holding a candle. His tall frame seemed smaller, humbled under the weight of his confession. His voice broke, but carried through the garden. "Eliza, I failed you by hiding my grief. I thought silence would protect the girls. I see now it only hurt them. But tonight I promise I will laugh again. I will raise them the way you wanted, full of love, full of truth, and I will remember you always." The girls leaned against Maya as she began humming a hymn, her voice low and steady, wrapping around them like a blanket. The tune carried up into the branches, mingling with the flicker of lantern light. Marble stretched at their feet, purring softly. Caroline sipped cocoa, her journalist's notebook left closed in her pocket. Tonight she was not writing. She was witnessing. She caught Richard's gaze and nodded. Her eyes said, "You are the man Eliza believed you could be." Later, when the twins had gone to bed, their hair smelling faintly of smoke and sugar, Richard lingered beneath the willow. Maya approached quietly, carrying the jar of letters now glowing with candlelight. Her dark eyes were calm, her posture graceful. "They'll keep writing," she said softly. "It helps them float." Richard nodded, looking at her. Really looking. She had been the anchor when he was adrift, the warmth when he had closed every door. His voice was low but firm. "You're not just here to care for the house. You're part of this family now, whether I admitted it or not." Maya's lips parted, her eyes shimmering. She lowered her head, humbled but steady. "Then I'll stay. For them. For you." The wind stirred the lanterns, scattering light across the garden. For the first time since Eliza's death, Richard felt peace. Not the cold stillness of control, but the living peace of love. He understood at last that his greatest goal was not to secure his company, but to secure the hearts of his daughters. Wealth might build towers, but laughter, memory, and love built a home. And in that unexpected light, Richard knew he had finally chosen rightly. Sometimes the greatest victories in life are not found in boardrooms or bank accounts, but in the quiet corners where love is remembered and family is held together. Richard's journey reminds us that no matter how much we achieve in the world, the most lasting legacy is the laughter we bring back to our children, the memories we choose to honor, and the time we give to those who need us most. In our own lives, it is easy to get caught chasing success or hiding our grief behind walls of silence. But healing often comes in small moments, writing a letter, lighting a candle, or simply sitting beside someone who feels alone. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel its light too. Comment your thoughts below and join our community by subscribing for more stories of hope and faith. And if you believe that God still guides families toward healing, write Amen in the comments as a prayer for every parent and every child who is learning to love again. May God bless you and your loved ones.